I was just coming back from my morning walk when I saw it. A small square box sitting quietly on my front porch. No label, no return address. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, the edges neatly folded like someone had taken their time. Not rushed, not careless. Just precise. Like how he used to wrap gifts at Christmas, always with those sharp corners and one piece of tape, never two. I paused. I live on a quiet street. Mail doesn't come early here, and when it does, it goes in the mailbox. No one delivers anything by hand anymore, not in this town. I scanned the street, no movement, no footsteps, just me, a bird on the neighbor's fence, and that box. I picked it up slowly. It wasn't heavy, but it had weight, not in pounds, but in memory. I took it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and just stared at it for a while. I didn't open it right away. Something in my chest told me this wasn't just a package. It was something else, something older, something buried. When I finally tore open the brown paper, there was no gift, no object inside, just a folded piece of lined notebook paper. I unfolded it, and what I saw made the room spin. 3 short lines. I never left. Open the wall behind the bed. W. That's it. No explanation, no date, just those words and his initial. West Ward, my husband. My husband who disappeared without a trace in the summer of 2003. My fingers gripped the edge of the note like it might vanish if I let go. My breath caught somewhere between my throat and chest. 22 years. 22 years since anyone had spoken his name out loud in this house. 22 years since I last saw his face. Since I heard his voice. Since I sat across from him at this very kitchen table, sipping coffee and listening to him talk about deadlines, broken tools, some project he had taken on for extra money, always some project. And now, this. After all this time, a note in his handwriting as if the world hadn't moved on without him, as if I hadn't aged 2 decades, as if he'd been here the whole time, watching the paint chip off the bedroom walls and the flower beds go wild. At that moment, my mind split in two. One part of me screamed, "This is a prank. Someone's playing a cruel joke." But the other part, the part I've spent years trying to silence, whispered, "It's him." Because I recognized that handwriting. I knew that slight slant to the left. That way he always made his capital W look like an M on one side. I had hundreds of notes from him once. Shopping lists, love notes tucked in Faye's lunchbox, half-finished reminders on the fridge. I memorized that handwriting like it was scripture. You don't forget the marks of the person you once planned forever with. I clutched the note to my chest and walked to the bedroom, the bed we shared, the one he left cold and untouched in the middle of the night 22 years ago. The wall behind the bed had always looked normal. Off-white paint, no visible seams, just a regular old wall in a regular old house. But suddenly, it didn't feel regular. It felt heavy, like it was holding something. I didn't knock. I didn't touch it. Not yet. I just sat down on the edge of the bed and tried to understand what was happening. My name is Morel Conway, and for 22 years, I've lived as the woman whose husband vanished. People called me strong, brave. Some called me delusional. Others whispered that he probably ran off with someone younger. Some pitied me. Most just forgot. I never remarried, not because I was waiting, but because some wounds don't close. They just settle into your skin and become part of your shape. I had a daughter to raise, a mortgage to pay, and a life to pretend to live. So I did. But now, that life is sitting in a box on my kitchen table, folded into 3 lines of a mystery I thought had died with the calendar year 2003. What was behind that wall? Why now? Why me? And if he truly never left, then where has he been all this time? Before we go any further, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're new here, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because what I'm about to tell you next, it changed everything. Before everything changed, I believed I had a quiet, good enough life. Not the kind that makes people jealous, but the kind that makes them nod and say, they're doing just fine. I met Ward Conway in 1981 at a small-town veterans benefit dinner in Akron. He was tall, confident, said little, but carried himself like someone who didn't need to explain anything. I was 21, working as an assistant librarian and still living with my mother. He was 8 years older, ex-military, recently returned from service overseas. He talked about building things. He liked working with his hands. He told me, I don't talk much, but I show up. At the time, I thought that was a rare kind of honesty. It felt noble, dependable. We married 2 years later. Nothing fancy. Courthouse, then sandwiches and lemonade in my aunt's backyard. By then, he'd started picking up work as a self-employed contractor. I kept my job at the library, grateful for the stability. Our early years were simple. We rented a small duplex, spent weekends going to flea markets and fixing things. Ward could rebuild anything: lawnmowers, engines, stair railings. He even crafted our first dining table from scratch. I remember tracing my finger along the edge of that table, proud of what we were building. In 1992, we had our daughter, Faye. She was everything. Red curls like my mother, Ward's quiet eyes, and an imagination that never stopped. She used to ask me, "Mama, do bees sleep?" Or, "If I paint the sun blue, will the flowers get cold?" Ward softened around her. He'd lie on the floor with her for hours, building Lego towers and tiny cities. At least in the beginning, we bought our first and only house in 1995. The same house I'm still living in today. 3 bedrooms, pale green siding, 1 oak tree in the front yard. Nothing special on the outside. But back then, it felt like proof. Proof that we were becoming a real family. Sundays were our ritual. Pancakes, the newspaper, then yard work or grocery shopping. Faye would draw chalk animals on the driveway, and Ward would sit on the porch sipping coffee with that faraway stare he always had. I used to wonder what he was thinking about. He never really said, but I told myself that was just who he was, a man who kept the hard things tucked away. I did the usual things mothers do: packed lunches, clipped coupons, stayed up late sewing Halloween costumes. I never complained. Ward worked odd hours. Some weeks he was gone on jobs for 4 or 5 days. When he was home, he'd kiss Faye on the forehead, check the furnace, and fall asleep on the couch with the remote in his hand. We didn't fight much. Not because we were always happy, but because we didn't talk about real things. If I asked him something hard, he'd go silent. If I cried, he'd hand me a towel, not a hug. I convinced myself that was better than shouting, better than chaos. I told myself he was just tired. That's how emotional distance sneaks in. Not like a bomb, more like a slow leak. But at the time, I didn't see that. I was too busy being the glue, holding everything together without asking for anything back. Our neighbors, the Crawleys, used to call us the Conways who've got it all figured out. They didn't see the quiet nights. They didn't hear the silence between our dinners. They didn't see how often Ward disappeared into the garage or how I'd fall asleep alone with the TV humming in the background. But it didn't matter. On the outside, we looked normal. Faye was thriving. She had her friends, her books, her dance classes. I kept the home in order. Ward brought in money. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling. And in the cracks, I built rituals to make things feel whole. I'd tuck handwritten notes into Ward's lunchbox, even if he never mentioned them. I'd record Faye's school plays and save the programs in a shoebox. I'd wake up early to make everyone's favorite breakfast on birthdays: banana pancakes for Ward, cinnamon toast for Faye. That was my version of love, showing up even when no one noticed. Looking back, I can see the fragility. But in those years, I didn't want to look too closely. I didn't want to question what we had, because I wasn't sure I'd survive the answers. And when Ward disappeared in 2003, everything I thought I knew about him, about us, about me, collapsed like a rotten beam in the middle of a house I had tried so hard to keep standing. But that collapse didn't come all at once. It came through signs, quiet ones, and I missed them. It was the fall of 2001, just after Faye started middle school, when I first noticed something in Ward I couldn't explain away. He had just returned from a 3-week job in Montana, a contract he said involved installing custom security doors at a small research facility. He walked through the front door looking thinner, more tired than usual. His beard was unkempt, his boots still caked in red clay dust. I reached to hug him, but he leaned past me, heading straight to the kitchen sink. I stood there, arms still half outstretched. I told myself, he's just exhausted. He's been driving for hours. But it wasn't just that. It was the look in his eyes. Not distant in the way he usually was, but watchful, like someone scanning for exits in a crowded room. That evening, I had made meatloaf, his favorite. I kept it warm for hours, expecting he'd want something comforting after being away so long. Faye had drawn him a welcome home card with stick figures and a big blue heart. She ran to give it to him before dinner. He took it, looked at it briefly, and set it on the counter. No smile. No thanks. Just a nod. Faye looked up at me, confused. I shrugged it off, trying to meet her with a half smile I didn't feel. At the dinner table, he picked at his food. Said almost nothing. I tried to ask about the trip. How the job went, whether the weather was bad, if the drive was long. He gave short, clipped answers. Fine. No trouble. Tiring. At one point, Faye asked him, "Daddy, did you see any bears?" He stared at her like the question didn't make sense. What? Montana has bears, she said, smiling. You said so before. He looked down at his plate. That was years ago. Something cold slipped into my stomach. He wasn't being rude. He wasn't angry. But he wasn't there either. His body was at the table, but something else had stayed behind in Montana, or wherever he'd really been. After dinner, while Faye watched TV in the living room, I tried again. I brought him a mug of tea and sat beside him on the back porch, where he smoked occasionally. He hadn't even unpacked. I was thinking maybe we could take a weekend trip next month, I said gently. Just the 3 of us. Maybe down to Hocking Hills. Faye's been asking to go again. He didn't look at me. We'll see, he said. That was it. We'll see. Not, sounds good. Not, let's talk about it. Just a flat, distant promise that carried no intention. I sat there trying to hold on to the silence without letting it break me. I told myself, he's under pressure. He needs space. But the truth was already blooming inside me like a bruise. Something wasn't right. Then came the moment I never forgot. The one I later understood as the beginning of the unraveling. I had gone upstairs to put laundry away. Ward was still outside. As I moved through the bedroom, I noticed something on his nightstand. A small black notebook, not one I'd seen before. It was closed, but a page was sticking out, not quite hidden, not in plain sight either. I picked it up. My name wasn't on it, but I read the single line anyway. Call from Kay at 3 a.m. Eastern, confirm site. That was all. I blinked. Kay? Site? Why would my husband be getting calls at 3 a.m.? I put the notebook back exactly how I found it, didn't mention it, didn't ask, because at that time I still believed it was better to protect the peace than confront a storm I didn't understand. That night in bed, he turned away from me and fell asleep without a word. I stared at the ceiling for hours, not angry, just alert, listening for something, anything. A shift in breath, a whispered word, a clue. But nothing came. The next morning, he was already gone when I woke up, left early for another short job out of town, or so his note said. I kept replaying the line in my head. Confirm site. What site? What call? Who was Kay? It could have been something innocent, some job-related shorthand, a construction code, maybe. But in my gut, I knew it was more. That was the first time I felt afraid in my own marriage. Not of being hurt, but of being locked out, shut out from whatever life he was living when he wasn't here. Still, I told myself, it's just one note. One trip, one moment. Don't make it into something bigger. So I folded the feeling, pressed it flat, and slid it into the drawer where women keep things they're not ready to name. That drawer wouldn't stay closed for long. People think emotional pain arrives like a wave, loud, crashing, sudden. But in my case, it came like dust, a fine layer that settled so slowly, I didn't even notice I was being buried under it. After that fall, after the night with the notebook, Ward never truly returned. He came home, yes, physically. He ate dinner sometimes, slept in our bed, but his eyes stopped landing on me. I started noticing that he no longer asked questions, not about Faye's school, not about my job, not about my migraines that had started creeping in every few weeks. If I mentioned a book I'd read or an article I clipped out for him, he'd nod absently, not even pretending to listen. There were no arguments, just air between us. One afternoon, I came home from work and found that he had rearranged the entire garage. Tools, boxes, workbenches, everything moved. My late father's old radio, the one I kept wrapped in a cloth on the shelf, was gone. I asked him, gently, what happened to Dad's radio? He didn't even look up, just said, it was broken. I tossed it. No warning, no question, just gone. That night, I cried in the laundry room, silently folding a stack of Faye's t-shirts. I wasn't crying over the radio. I was crying over the way I'd started to feel like a piece of furniture, something he walked around, leaned on, but never truly saw. Faye noticed, too. She was 12 by then, and kids are more perceptive than we give them credit for. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table finishing homework, she asked, "Did Daddy stop liking us?" I didn't know what to say. I reached for her hand and said, "Grown-ups get tired sometimes, sweetheart. It doesn't mean they stop loving." But even I wasn't sure anymore. Ward had also stopped coming to school functions. He used to make an effort, at least show up for science fairs or parent-teacher meetings. Now, every time I asked, there was always a reason, a deadline, a sore back, a broken drill. So I went alone. I clapped alone. I watched other couples whisper during performances and lean into each other, and I sat with my hands folded, pretending I was just tired, not lonely. We had a family dinner at my sister June's house that Christmas. I remember it because it was the last time we attended one together. Everyone was laughing around the table, passing mashed potatoes and retelling childhood stories. I glanced at Ward, hoping he'd chime in. He used to be funny, even charming when he wanted to be. But he was staring blankly at the far wall, chewing slowly, disengaged. After dessert, my sister pulled me aside in the kitchen and whispered, "Is everything okay between you two?" I smiled too fast. "He's just tired, working too much." It felt easier to lie than to say, "I don't know what we are anymore." But the worst part wasn't what he said or didn't say. It was what he forgot. He forgot our anniversary that year. Not just forgot. Didn't acknowledge it, didn't pretend. No card, no flowers, no, "Sorry, I've been busy." Just silence. I had set the table that evening, made his favorite corn chowder, lit a candle. Faye helped me bake a small cake. He walked in late, looking through the mail. "Dinner ready?" he asked. I nodded. I didn't mention the date. I wanted to see if he'd realize. He didn't. We ate in silence. I stared at the candle, let it burn low. When he got up to go into the garage afterward, he didn't even glance at the cake sitting on the counter. I waited until the garage door shut, then quietly blew out the candle. That night, lying in bed, I turned my back to him. I stared at the wall and thought, so this is how you disappear while still being here. I used to think of marriage as a structure, like a house you build together brick by brick, but I had started to feel like I was the only one still holding a hammer. He was living inside the house, sure, but he wasn't patching leaks. He wasn't fixing cracks. He just existed, while I eroded. The real heartbreak wasn't loud. It wasn't betrayal in the way people imagine it. It was this, the erasure of us in small, invisible steps. He stopped calling me by name. He stopped asking me if I was cold. He stopped noticing when I'd get dressed up for church or put on lipstick for the first time in weeks, and somewhere inside me, I stopped waiting for him to notice. I began talking to myself in the kitchen, leaving the TV on for background noise, taking longer walks just to delay going home. That's how emotional erosion works, not with cruelty, but with neglect, with silence. And by the time Ward left, really left, there was almost nothing left of the man I married. But part of me still clung to the hope that he'd return, that something would shake him, bring him back to the version of him that used to build me shelves, tuck Faye in with silly voices, leave handwritten notes on the fridge that said, "Don't forget the milk, love you." But those notes had stopped long before he vanished. And so had he. It happened on a Sunday morning, Mother's Day to be exact. The year was 2002. Faye had just turned 12 and was in that beautiful, chaotic phase where everything felt dramatic and sacred. She had been whispering with our neighbor, Mrs. Linton, for 2 days straight, giggling and running between houses with a clipboard and a backpack full of colored markers. I pretended not to notice, but I knew she was planning something for me. That morning, I woke to the sound of movement in the kitchen. I stayed in bed, letting myself feel, for once, like I might be cared for. The smell of cinnamon and something burnt wafted in. I smiled, eyes still closed. Faye burst into the bedroom minutes later holding a tray. 2 uneven slices of toast, a cracked cup of orange juice, and a note she had written in red crayon, "Happy Mother's Day, Mama. You are made of books, sunshine, and the strongest kind of quiet. Love, Faye." I held it to my chest and nearly cried. Not because of the food, but because someone saw me. Someone remembered. Ward wasn't in bed. He hadn't been when I woke up. I figured he was in the garage or the yard. Faye went to get him. "Mama wants to eat with us," she called out as she skipped back down the hallway. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I got out of bed, straightened the comforter, and walked toward the window. I saw him in the driveway, sleeves rolled up, elbow deep in the hood of his truck, radio playing loudly. He hadn't even changed out of his work jeans. I walked out to the porch in my robe, note still in hand, and called his name. Once, then twice, louder. He didn't answer. I walked down to him, stood right beside the open hood. "Did you forget what day it is?" I asked gently. He wiped his hands with a rag, didn't look at me. "Truck's been rattling for 2 weeks. It won't wait for holidays." I glanced toward the house. Faye was watching from the living room window. "But it's Mother's Day," I said. "She made breakfast. Just take 15 minutes. He finally looked at me, not cruelly, but blankly, like I was an interruption, a pop-up ad on a screen he was trying to clear. "Why does everything have to be an event?" he said. "She'll understand. You will too." He turned back to the engine. That's when it happened. That's when something in me shifted. Not broke. Not yet. But it bent hard, like a beam giving in under too much weight. I turned around, walked slowly back into the house, and told Faye that Daddy was fixing the truck and would join us later. She didn't cry. She didn't pout. She just nodded and said, "I'll sit with you then." We sat at the table, just the 2 of us. I tried to make jokes about the toast being perfectly burnt, and we pretended it was fine. But inside, I wasn't fine, because it wasn't just the toast, or the note, or the truck. It was what it all meant. It meant I could go unnoticed even on a day meant for recognition, that I could be handed silence instead of a small kindness, that I could be standing 5 feet from my husband, holding a crayon-written love letter, and he could still turn a wrench instead of turning toward me. After breakfast, Faye ran off to play. I quietly cleared the plates, folded the note, and slid it into the drawer next to the oven, the one where I kept school flyers, recipes, and reminders I never had to give aloud. Ward didn't come inside until well after noon. By then, the cinnamon smell had faded, the dishes were washed, and the moment was gone. I asked him once more, calmly, Did you really not have 5 minutes? He shrugged. What do you want me to say, Morel? It's just a day. That was the moment I stopped expecting anything from him. I stopped reminding him of dates. I stopped making his favorite meals. I stopped trying to pull him into memories he had no interest in making. The humiliation wasn't loud. It didn't involve yelling or slam doors, but it burned all the same. A quiet kind of cruelty, the kind that makes you question whether your needs even matter. That was the day I learned that being forgotten by someone who lives with you is lonelier than being alone. That was the day I realized I had built a life where my presence could be skipped over without guilt. And the worst part? I didn't even argue. I just folded the moment like I folded the napkins, placed it inside myself, and kept going. Because that's what I'd been taught, to swallow pain, smooth it down, and smile through the ache. But part of me, the part that still remembered being seen, being chosen, began to curl inward. Not dead, just quieter, waiting. It didn't happen after a fight. There were no suitcases slammed shut, no yelling, no doors thrown open in the rain. When I left, it was in silence, just the way Ward had trained our life to be. It was spring 2003. Faye had just finished 7th grade. She was starting to get tall, with that quiet intelligence that always reminded me of my mother. She'd begun asking questions I didn't know how to answer, about womanhood, about boys, about trust. And I kept feeling like a fraud. How could I guide her through the world when I was still trying to understand my own worth? Ward was home more often then, but somehow even more absent. He'd started sleeping in the guest room to stretch his back. That was his excuse, and I never challenged it. We existed like strangers in a shared space. I cooked, he ate, I folded laundry, he watched the news. I cried in the shower. He never asked why. The day I left, I hadn't planned to. Not exactly. I woke early. The house was quiet. That kind of eerie quiet that feels like it's waiting for something. Faye had gone to her friend Jess's for a sleepover. Ward was still asleep in the other room. I stood in the hallway for a long time, looking at the closed door to the guest room. There were no sounds, no breathing, no shifting sheets. I went into our bedroom, the room we used to share. The light from the window was soft, landing across the quilt I'd made the year Faye was born. I sat down on the edge of the bed and opened my nightstand drawer. Inside was the crayon note Faye had written me the year before on Mother's Day. I had read it so many times the folds were beginning to tear. I smoothed it out gently, my fingers tracing the words. You are made of books, sunshine, and the strongest kind of quiet. That line hit me differently that morning. The strongest kind of quiet. That's what I had become, and I didn't know if that was something to be proud of or something to mourn. I stood up, walked to the closet, and pulled out the brown duffel bag I'd used on our camping trips. I packed only a few things: 3 changes of clothes, my toothbrush, a framed picture of Faye from her school recital, and 1 paperback novel I hadn't had the time or heart to read. Then I took the car keys from the hook near the kitchen door. I didn't leave a note. I didn't want to explain something he never asked about. But as I reached the front door, I paused. I looked around that house, the one we had bought together, painted together, lived in for over a decade. The dent in the hallway where Faye had crashed her scooter, the faint stain on the carpet from Ward's coffee spill, the wind chime I'd hung and rehung a dozen times, hoping he'd notice. He never did. The memories clung to the walls like wallpaper. Beautiful, faded and starting to peel. And I realized something. I wasn't walking away from him. I was walking away from the me I had become inside those walls. The woman who stopped asking for anything, who made herself small enough to fit into someone else's silence. I drove to my sister June's house an hour away. She opened the door, saw the look on my face, and said nothing. Just pulled me into a hug so tight I broke down, not with sobs, just tears, steady, unstoppable tears. We sat on her couch for hours. I told her everything. Not all at once, in pieces, like letting air out of a balloon that had been overfilled for years. She didn't judge. She didn't tell me what I should have done years ago. She just listened. Later that evening, I called Faye. She was eating pizza with Jess's family, giggling in the background. When she heard my voice, she paused. "Mom, are you okay?" I wanted to tell her everything, but I didn't want to color her memories of her father. Not yet. So I said softly, "I'm okay, sweetheart. I just needed a little break." She was quiet. Then she said, "From Daddy?" And I replied, "From feeling invisible." There was a long pause. Then she said, "Okay, I get it." She got it more than I wanted her to. For the next few weeks, I stayed at June's. Ward didn't call, not once. And that told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't missed. I was replaced by routine. And maybe, in some part of him, he was relieved. People asked where I was. I told them I was taking some time. They nodded politely. Women my age always understand that phrase. It means, I've had enough, but I don't want to make a scene. Eventually, I came back to the house. Faye needed stability. I needed closure. But something had shifted. He was gone. So when he truly disappeared a few months later, the kind of gone that leaves police reports and unanswered questions, I didn't feel shock. I felt confirmation. He had been leaving for years, and I had finally started doing the same. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't scream. It doesn't even whisper. It just settles into your bones and lives there, like cold air in a house that no longer remembers how to hold warmth. By the winter of 2004, that's where I was, alone in a house built for three, now occupied by one woman and echoes of a past no one would speak of. Ward had been gone for nearly a year. At first, there were searches, phone calls. The sheriff came by, asked me the same questions over and over. When did you last see him? Was he acting strange? Did he have enemies? I answered quietly, like someone reciting a grocery list. He was always acting strange, I said once. The officer didn't write that down. They never found a body. No crash site. No evidence of foul play. Just his truck abandoned near an old state road, empty. Wallet left on the seat. No fingerprints other than his own. No notes. No farewell. Just gone. People began to speculate. He ran off. He had another family. Maybe he just couldn't handle life anymore. Everyone had a theory. No one had facts. After the initial wave of attention passed, silence returned. Thick, heavy silence. And I stayed. Faye had moved in with her aunt by then, needing distance, needing normalcy. I didn't blame her. I was hollow. I couldn't speak without crying, couldn't cook without breaking down over a measuring cup. Grief makes fools of us all. But grief without a body, without a truth, makes ghosts out of the living. The house was falling apart. The ceiling in the upstairs hallway had begun to stain from a slow leak. Every time it rained, a new patch appeared. I tried to ignore it. I placed a bucket under the worst spot, pretending it was temporary. But the leak was like everything else I refused to fix. The unspoken, the unfinished, the unwanted. The garden out front grew wild. Roses that Ward had planted years ago stretched over the walkway, thorns tangled like angry fingers. I couldn't bring myself to prune them. They were the last thing he'd touched that bloomed. I stopped answering the phone, stopped going to church. I couldn't bear the looks. Pity from some, suspicion from others. In their eyes, I was either the abandoned wife or the woman who knew more than she let on. But the truth was simple. I didn't know anything. And that was the part that tore me up the most. I remember one night more vividly than the rest. It was late, maybe 2 or 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep. The ceiling had started to drip again. I lay in bed staring at the slow pulse of water hitting the bucket. I counted each drop like a heartbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then silence, just for a second, followed by a sudden heavy splat as the water finally overflowed. I sat up in the dark, soaked in that sound, and something inside me gave way. I got up, barefoot, and stood under the leak, let it drip onto my face like baptism or punishment. I didn't wipe it away. I walked down the stairs in my nightgown and into the kitchen. I opened every cupboard, every drawer, looking for something, anything, that made me feel tethered to this world. A receipt, a card, a message. But all I found were broken pens, expired coupons, and silence. I opened the fridge. Empty. I sat on the floor in front of it and whispered, "What am I still doing here?" No answer came, just the hum of the motor, steady and uncaring. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the moon move through the sky like a slow confession. The tree in the front yard swayed in the wind, its shadow dancing on the porch like a man coming home. But no one came. I realized then that Ward hadn't just disappeared. I had. Piece by piece, I had let myself fade to accommodate someone else's emptiness. I had become a placeholder, a background noise, a witness to my own erasure. And now there was no one left to witness me. That was rock bottom. Not because I was hungry, not because I was broke. I had food and some savings and a roof that only leaked in one spot. It was rock bottom because I had no one to speak to, no one who truly saw me, not even myself. Grief, they say, is love with nowhere to go. But what happens when your grief isn't even allowed to wear a name? I wasn't a widow, I wasn't divorced. I was something in between, suspended in a quiet horror story with no villain, no ending, and no permission to begin again. And yet, sitting in that silence, soaked with rainwater and memory, something stirred inside me. It wasn't strength, not yet, but it was a flicker, a thought I hadn't dared to entertain in months. Maybe there's more than this. Maybe, just maybe, I hadn't vanished completely. Maybe the silence hadn't erased everything. Not yet. It was an ordinary Tuesday when the package arrived, late March, still cold. The wind had that stubborn bite Ohio carries until mid-April. I had just returned from the grocery store. Bread, apples, canned soup, and a bouquet of daffodils I didn't need, but bought anyway. Sometimes I brought flowers into the house just to remember what color looked like. I parked the car, popped the trunk, and began unloading bags. That's when I saw it. A box on my porch. Small, square, wrapped in plain brown paper. No postage, no tape, no handwriting, just sitting there like it had grown out of the concrete. I stood still for a few seconds, heart picking up pace. Maybe one of the neighbors dropped something off? But it wasn't a casserole dish. And it wasn't left by anyone I recognized. I scanned the street. No one around. I walked up slowly. It wasn't heavy. Just enough weight to feel intentional. I brought it inside, placed it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it. I didn't open it right away. Something about it felt off. Not threatening, not dangerous, but personal. And I hadn't had anything personal arrive for me in years. Eventually, I peeled back the paper. Inside, no gift, no object, no return address, just one piece of lined notebook paper, folded crisply, deliberate. I unfolded it with shaking fingers, 3 lines, written in a hand I hadn't seen since 2003. I never left. Opened the wall behind the bed. W. That was all. 3 sentences and a signature. West Ward. I dropped the paper. My legs gave out and I sat down hard on the kitchen chair. My breath was shallow, my mouth dry. Ward's handwriting. Not similar to his. Not a forgery. It was his. That same slant to the left. The way he made his E look like a backward 3. The way his capital W had that slight hook at the top right corner. I had stared at enough notes from him to know. It was him. But how? And why now? For 22 years, I had imagined every possibility. That he had died. That he had started a new life. That he had lost his memory. That he had been taken. That he had simply stopped caring and wanted out. But not this. Not I never left. That sentence rang in my head like a bell underwater. I never left. Then where had he been? I picked up the note again and read it over and over, searching for something. A code, a clue, some deeper message. Open the wall behind the bed. I hadn't changed the bedroom in all these years. I couldn't bring myself to. His side of the closet still held 1 or 2 shirts I hadn't been able to toss. The alarm clock was unplugged, but never removed. The headboard still creaked if I leaned on it too hard. I walked upstairs in a fog. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, the afternoon light angling in across the wooden floorboards. The room smelled like dust and fabric softener. Nothing out of place. Everything frozen. I walked to the bed and gently pulled it away from the wall. Behind the headboard, I saw it. Faint but there. A square cut into the drywall. The seams had been painted over, but up close you could see the subtle lines, like someone had built a panel and then hidden it in plain sight. My chest tightened. My mind rushed with memories. Vague flashes of Ward telling me he needed to run wiring back there in 2002. Something about upgrading the outlets. He said he'd get to it later. He never did. I hadn't thought about it in years. Now, staring at it, I realized it wasn't for wiring. It wasn't unfinished work. It was a message left in silence. I placed my palm on the wall. It was cool, solid. But I could feel a slight give, like the panel wasn't nailed in, just fitted, waiting. I didn't open it. Not yet. I stepped back. My hands were trembling, my mouth dry, my thoughts sprinting in every direction. Why now? Who delivered the package? Had he been alive all this time? Had he been here? Was he watching me? Or was this a ghost reaching out one final time? I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at that hidden seam. It suddenly felt like the room wasn't empty anymore, like time had folded back in on itself and brought 2003 into 2025. For the first time in decades, I wasn't thinking about how to make it to the next day. I was thinking about the day that had just arrived. Unannounced, impossible, undeniable. I stared at that panel and whispered, "What did you leave behind, Ward?" And more importantly, why did you want me to find it now? I didn't open the panel that night. I thought I would. I thought I'd run downstairs, grab a hammer, rip it open with desperate fingers like someone unwrapping salvation. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there in the dim light of the bedroom, staring at the wall behind the bed. Not just as a piece of drywall anymore, but as something alive. Something that had been holding a secret for 22 years. My breathing slowed. The questions in my head stopped racing. Everything quieted, and then something strange happened. I felt present, fully, for the first time in years. I sat on the bed for hours holding the note, not crying, not panicking, just being. And in that stillness, I felt something returning to me that I hadn't even realized I'd lost. Myself. I woke early the next morning before the sun rose. I made coffee. Black, hot, no sugar. I stood in the kitchen and watched the steam curl above the mug like breath. For years, I had floated through this house like a ghost, moving from room to room out of habit, not desire. Folding laundry, paying bills, feeding the cat that died 2 winters ago. I had lived reactively, not intentionally, but today felt different. Every sound was sharper. The refrigerator's hum, the floor creaking under my feet, the birds pecking the wet soil in the garden. Everything had weight again. I was alert. The package had cracked something open inside me. Not just curiosity, but energy, memory, ownership. I walked through the house, touching walls I hadn't cared about in a decade. I opened drawers and cabinets, pulled out forgotten photos, flipped through old recipes, opened boxes labeled Ward's Tools and Faye's School Projects. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I wanted to feel connected again, to my life, to what was real, to me. Later that day, I pulled out a pad of paper and a pen. I hadn't journaled in years. The words were slow at first, clumsy, hesitant. But once I started, they didn't stop. March 22nd. He sent a note. He said, "I never left." But I did, piece by piece. And now I want to return to myself. I want to know. That word circled my mind all day. No. I was done with not knowing, with being kept in the dark, by Ward, by my own fear, by the routine of pretending everything was fine. In the afternoon, I sat in the bedroom again, staring at the wall, still not ready to open it, because this wasn't about urgency. This wasn't about chasing answers. This was about owning the moment before the truth arrived. I went outside and pruned the roses for the first time in years. The thorns bit at my gloves, but I didn't stop. I cut them back with precision, clearing the path to the porch that had once been hidden behind branches and dead stems. I wiped the dust off the window ledges, cleaned the bird bath, rolled up the faded welcome mat, and threw it away. I was making space, not just in the house, but inside me. For years, I had convinced myself I was surviving, but really, I was disappearing. Slowly, politely, almost respectfully. Now, I was waking up. And the strangest part? I wasn't afraid. That night, I took a long bath. I lit a candle. I brushed my hair, even though no one would see me. I opened my old jewelry box and wore my favorite pair of earrings to bed. Tiny gold leaves Ward had given me on our 5th anniversary, back when we still made each other smile without trying. I didn't wear them because of him. I wore them because I remembered who I was when he gave them to me, and that woman, that version of Morel, was starting to stir again. The next morning, I called Faye. We hadn't spoken in weeks, not because we were fighting, but because there was this fog between us, a distance neither of us had the courage to name. She picked up on the third ring. "Mom?" Her voice still had that mix of warmth and suspicion, like she was bracing herself for the version of me who didn't fully show up. "Hi, baby," I said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." She was quiet. Then, "Are you okay?" I smiled into the phone. "Not yet, but I think I'm getting there." Another pause. Then she said softly, "That's good." I didn't tell her about the note. Not yet. I wasn't ready to share it. I wasn't even sure if I believed it. I needed it to be mine a little longer, because for once I had something to hold that no one else could define for me. Later that evening, I stood in front of the wall behind the bed again. This time, I placed my hand on it not in fear, but in readiness. I wasn't just waking up to a mystery. I was waking up to choice. And when I opened that wall, whenever I chose to, I would do it as someone awake, not as someone desperate. Because whatever was on the other side, I finally understood this. I wasn't looking for Ward anymore. I was looking for myself. The next morning, I opened the panel, not with trembling hands, not with fear, just resolve. I took the claw end of a small hammer from the garage, quietly removed the headboard from the wall, and gently wedged the metal into the faint groove Ward had left behind more than 2 decades ago. The panel gave with a soft click. Behind it was a small, hollow compartment, about 2 feet wide and maybe a foot deep, carefully built, lined with black foam insulation, protected, hidden. Inside there was a single duffel bag, army green worn but intact, and a few wrapped objects layered beneath a canvas cloth. A faint smell of cedar and old paper floated up like memory. I didn't pull everything out at once. I sat on the floor beside the bed, crossed my legs like a child at story time, and carefully unzipped the duffel. First, cassette tapes. Old, dusty, unlabeled, 8 of them. Then, a small leather-bound notebook with a rubber band holding it shut. A sealed manila envelope, heavy, taped shut, and at the bottom, a burner phone, dead, ancient. Tucked under a pair of folded socks like someone had packed in a rush. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even call Faye. Because this moment wasn't for reaction. It was for documentation, for understanding. I placed each item gently on the bed, arranging them in a line. I stared at them for a long time. I didn't reach for the tapes first. I went for the notebook. The pages were filled with short, choppy entries. Dates, codes, fragments of sentences. Mentions of places I didn't recognize. Porterville, March 12th, 2004. Didn't make contact. Avoided detection near signal tower. Felt watched. And then, if you're reading this, Morel, I didn't get out. That line stopped my breath. So this was meant for me. He knew I'd find it one day. He knew I'd open the wall, but why now? Who delivered the note? If he died years ago, who sent the message? That's when I realized this wasn't over. It wasn't just a box from the past. It was a trigger for something that still had legs. So I got up and began my silent setup. No calls, no panic, no announcements, just preparation. I began with information. I bought an old cassette player from a secondhand shop downtown. Told the clerk I was digitizing my late father's sermons. He smiled, wrapped it in newspaper, and gave me a discount. Back home, I played the first tape. Ward's voice filled the room, low, familiar, and distorted slightly by time. Day 14. Moved locations again. They know I've seen the file. If anything happens to me, the insurance docs are behind the bed. Morel, you'll know what to do. My hands clenched. There was something bigger here than abandonment. It wasn't just about him walking out. It wasn't just about me being left behind. There was danger, secrecy, a truth someone didn't want revealed. And Ward, for all his flaws, had tucked that truth inside my home like a time capsule meant to crack open only when the moment was right. And it was right now. I placed the cassette recorder in the guest room closet behind my winter coats. I scanned each page of the notebook and uploaded the images to a private folder on a hard drive I'd never used before. I changed my passwords. I checked the locks on every window, every door. I scheduled an appointment with a financial advisor and asked about frozen joint assets. Hypothetically, I said. She didn't ask questions. She gave me the paperwork. And most quietly of all, I began keeping a second journal. Not for feelings this time, but facts. Times, dates, names, questions. I titled the first page, "If I disappear, start here." The setup wasn't just for discovery. It was for protection. Because if Ward had been hiding something for this long, and if someone else delivered that note to my porch 22 years later, then someone still wanted me to find it, or wanted me to be watched once I did. Either way, I wasn't going to be caught off guard. That night, I put the panel back into place. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I was claiming control over when and how this story moved forward. I didn't tell Faye. Not yet. She deserved the truth, but I needed more pieces first. I needed clarity. And most of all, I needed to do this as the woman I had finally remembered how to be. For years, I was erased. Now I was documenting everything. I was building something I never had during the years Ward quietly disappeared from me. A record, a trail, proof of life. My life. The next morning, I went into town and printed one photo of me and Faye at the beach from years ago. I framed it, put it on the kitchen table. Not because I was sentimental, because I was leaving traces now. If something happened to me, they wouldn't say I vanished quietly. They'd know I was here. I was aware. And I had begun. Power doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it returns on the soles of your shoes, soft, quiet, and impossible to ignore. After I found the tapes, the notebook, and the envelope, something in me changed. But more importantly, people around me felt that change, even if they didn't know what it meant. It began with my voice. I started answering the phone again. The first call was from Faye. It was routine, just to check in. But instead of the usual tired tone she'd come to expect from me, I spoke with calm confidence. My voice didn't trail off. I didn't second-guess my words. I asked about her new job, her partner, her apartment. I made her laugh, and then I said, casually, "I've been going through some old things. Found a few surprises." She paused. "Good surprises or bad?" "Not sure yet," I said. but I'm not afraid of them anymore." She didn't press, but I knew she heard it. The difference. Later that week, I ran into Harlan, Ward's brother, at the hardware store. He barely looked me in the eye. That wasn't new. Since Ward's disappearance, Harlan had always kept a strange distance, like being near me made something inside him itch. But this time, I watched him squirm. He nodded stiffly. "Morel." I smiled, not a warm one, not a cruel one, just still. "Harlan," I said, "you still keeping busy out at that cabin?" He blinked. "What cabin?" I tilted my head slightly. "The one Ward used to talk about, up near the state line." He looked rattled, not because I said something threatening, but because I said something at all. I had been invisible to him for 2 decades. The woman who never asked, never demanded, never looked deeper than she was allowed. Now I was naming things, looking directly into people's faces, watching how they reacted when I didn't apologize for taking up space. That's when I understood something. I wasn't powerless all those years. I had just been polite, and that politeness had protected others far more than it had protected me. That week, I made a quiet appointment with a probate lawyer in the next town over, someone with no ties to Ward's family or local gossip. I brought the envelope from the wall unopened. Inside were documents, legal ones, a life insurance policy in Ward's name, a copy of a will dated June 2003, marked private, offshore account details, transfer codes, all signed, all real. The lawyer reviewed them carefully. "Do you understand what this could mean?" she asked me. I nodded. "I'm beginning to." "Do you want to go public?" "Not yet," I said, "but I want it documented. I want it protected, and I want it noted that I came forward." Her eyes softened. She saw it. Not a widow chasing answers, but a woman finally holding the pen. Back home, I didn't celebrate. I didn't even tell Faye, but I began to act differently. I dressed each morning with purpose, not for anyone else, but for clarity. My movements were sharper, my thoughts more direct. And the strangest part? People noticed. The cashier at the market, who used to call me sweetheart with pity in his eyes, now called me ma'am and bagged my items faster. The neighbor who once avoided me after Ward vanished now lingered at the mailbox, making small talk, watching me more carefully than before. I wasn't loud, I wasn't rude, but something had changed in my posture, in my presence. I had become undeniable. One afternoon, I got a call from Ward's old army buddy, someone I hadn't spoken to since 2004. He said he was checking in, said he'd been thinking about Ward lately, but his tone was wrong, too casual, too curious. "I heard someone dropped a package at your place," he said, just a little too softly. I didn't ask how he knew, I just said, "They left it, I opened it." That's all. Silence on the other end. Then, "You doing okay?" I smiled into the phone. Better than ever. He hung up first. That night, I took all the documents, the notebook, and the tapes, and I scanned them digitally again, uploaded them to an encrypted drive, stored the backups in multiple locations. I wasn't going to be careless, because the more I moved forward, the more I understood. Someone had kept me in the dark on purpose. Someone knew I wasn't supposed to find what was behind that wall. And now that I had, the quiet setup I had built was turning into quiet leverage. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to ruin anyone. I just wanted the truth to exist. On paper, on record, in me. And I wanted them to know that I knew. That knowledge was power. Not the kind that screams. The kind that walks into a room and makes people sit straighter without knowing why. The power had started to shift, not because I had taken it, but because I'd remembered it was always mine. I didn't plan a confrontation. I didn't write a speech or rehearse anything in front of the mirror. I wasn't angry. I wasn't looking for anyone to beg for forgiveness or confess their sins. I just wanted the truth to stop hiding. It started with a call to Faye. I asked her to come visit for the weekend. I said I had something I wanted to share. I told her I was okay, not sick, not in trouble, just ready. She hesitated. I could feel it in the silence. Then, "Okay, Mom, I'll come." When she arrived, I noticed how much older she looked. Not in a sad way, just grown. 33. Confident. Sharp. Her presence filled the room like words never did. She hugged me gently, held on longer than she used to. "Your hair looks nice," she said. I smiled. I remembered I have one. She laughed, then narrowed her eyes. "What's going on?" I didn't answer right away. I let her settle in, made tea, turned off the TV, sat across from her at the kitchen table, where so much of our life had unfolded. Homework, birthdays, tears, apologies, and long silences. And then I handed her a small shoebox. Inside, the letter, the tapes, one printout of the will, a USB drive with the scans, a single photo of Ward from the year he left. She stared down at the box for a long time. "Where did you get all this?" she asked. I met her eyes. "Behind the wall. The one behind the bed." Her expression barely changed, but something in her shoulders pulled back. She reached for the note first, read it twice, then looked back at me. "Is this real?" I nodded. "It's his handwriting. I'd bet my life on it." She lifted one of the tapes, ran her fingers over the plastic. "I don't understand. You're saying he was here all this time?" "I don't know," I said. "But he left something for us, for me. And now I think you deserve to see it too." I reached across the table, took her hand gently, and said something I hadn't said to her since she was a child. "You're not alone, and neither am I, not anymore." That moment, the two of us side by side, both holding pieces of a truth too big for one person, that was the confrontation. Not with Ward, not with Harlan, not with the past, with the lie that I had been helpless, that I had no voice, that I had simply been left behind. Faye asked, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I paused. "Because I wasn't ready. Because for 20 years, I thought I had to protect you from what he did. Or didn't do. And maybe I was trying to protect myself, too. From knowing how much I let myself shrink." Her eyes softened. "You didn't shrink, Mom. You adapted." I felt tears press at the corners of my eyes, but I held them. "I want you to listen to the tapes," I said. "Not all at once, not with me in the room, but when you're ready." She nodded slowly. "Okay." That evening, I called Harlan. I asked him to come by the next day. I didn't say why. He showed up, stiff, cautious. His eyes darted from my face to the house behind me. He looked like a man who knew his past had just been unearthed. I didn't invite him in. We stood on the porch. He shifted nervously. "I know, Harlan." His shoulders stiffened. "Know what?" "Don't insult us both. I found the panel. I found the bag, the tapes, the will." He said nothing, just stared. "I'm not asking for an explanation," I said. "I don't need to know what you were told or who warned you, but I want you to know something." I leaned slightly forward, not threatening, just present. "I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not scared, and I'm not covering for anyone." He swallowed hard. "So what now?" I tilted my head. "Now you can go, and you can think about what it feels like to be on the other side of silence." He nodded, a slight tremble in his lips. "I never meant for—" "I know," I said. "You just meant to disappear, like him." I turned and walked inside, closed the door. That was the reveal. No raised voices, no courtroom, no spectacle. Just truth, clear, cold, and heavy, placed exactly where it needed to land. Afterward, I sat in the living room with Faye. She was holding the tape recorder like it was something sacred. "I don't know what to do with all of this," she said softly. "You don't have to do anything," I replied. "Just know it. Let it be part of the story now. Our story." She looked at me for a long time, You seem different, Mom. I nodded. I am. Are you okay? I smiled. I'm free. It came in the mail, of all places. Again. 3 weeks after I showed Faye the tapes. 2 weeks after I told Harlan to leave and never come back. 1 week after I finished transcribing every word of Ward's final message. The envelope was thick, embossed, and official. Return address, United States Department of Justice. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it for a full minute on the kitchen counter, heart suddenly loud again. Not in fear, but anticipation. I opened it slowly, carefully. Inside, 4 sheets of legal documentation, 1 letter, and a certified notice from a federal trustee. The letter was short. Mrs. Conway, we are contacting you in relation to federal case file number C91372, previously sealed under classified provisions, now formally declassified as of March 17, 2025. Your husband, Ward Conway, was identified as a confidential whistleblower during a 2002 to 2003 military subcontracting corruption investigation. His involvement directly contributed to multiple criminal convictions and led to the recovery of over $31 million in misappropriated government funds. As a part of his sealed cooperation, provisions were made under federal witness protection protocols. Due to the unanticipated termination of contact with your husband in late 2003, the government is now releasing remaining asset obligations assigned to him. You, as his legal spouse, are the designated recipient. We are prepared to release the remaining trust and account balances upon confirmation of identity. Please contact the listed representative, Office of the Federal Trustee Division. I read the letter 3 times before setting it down. I didn't know what I felt. Relief wasn't the right word, nor was triumph. It was something quieter, more profound, justification. Not for Ward, but for me. For the years I spent being pitied, whispered about, dismissed. For every sideways glance that said, she must have driven him away, or she must have known something. And for all the times I doubted my own memory, my own worth. The documents included itemized accounts, transfers pending, an offshore trust Ward had opened legally through the Department of Justice, meant to be delivered upon the event of full disappearance or death. There were funds, significant ones, more than I ever expected, enough to live, enough to rebuild. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the truth. Ward hadn't left because he was cruel, or bored, or selfish. He had been protecting something, maybe even us. And somewhere along the line, it cost him everything. But here's the real twist. He didn't protect us by staying. He protected us by hiding something powerful enough to eventually return with weight. I called Faye. I read her the letter. She sat silently on the other end of the line. When I finished, she didn't ask about the money. She asked, "Do you feel different now?" I answered honestly. I feel righted. Not repaired, not repaid, just restored. That same week, I filed to reclaim the title to the house fully in my name. I met with an estate attorney to place the funds in a living trust for Faye and her future children. And I made one more call to the same quiet attorney who'd helped me register Ward's will a month earlier. I want to write a statement, I told her, not for court, for record. She met me the next day. We sat in my living room as I read it aloud while she typed. Statement of fact. Morell Conway. I was not abandoned. I was not discarded. I was left in the care of a truth too big for me to hold alone. For years, I thought silence was safety. I now understand it was a kind of war. My husband vanished to protect a truth, and that truth returned to me. Not with apologies, but with proof. I am not asking for pity. I am not demanding attention. I am placing this in the record because women like me are often erased from the narrative. I was not erased. I endured. And now I stand. She finished typing, hit print. I signed the bottom. That, more than the check or the documents or the estate, was the justice. Being seen, being recorded, being real again. I stood at the window later that evening, watching the wind move through the trees. The same trees Ward used to trim when we first bought this house. The same wind, I used to pretend, was him returning late from a job, footsteps crunching on the gravel. But now I didn't need that fantasy. I wasn't waiting at the window anymore. I was standing in it, whole, upright, named. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. The house smelled of fresh coffee and lemon oil. I had been cleaning, not out of obligation, but because it felt good to care for something again. For years, I had let the dust gather, not just on the furniture, but in my own life. Now I was clearing it. I opened the front door slowly, and there she was, Faye. She stood on the porch in a soft gray sweater, her hands stuffed into her coat pockets. Her eyes were damp, though it wasn't raining. She looked both younger and older than the last time I saw her. "Hey, Mama," she said softly. I stepped aside without a word. She walked in like she had when she was 10, quietly, cautiously, like she wasn't sure what she was walking into. We sat in the kitchen. I poured her a cup of coffee. She didn't touch it. Instead, she pulled something out of her purse, a cassette, one of the tapes. "I listened to this one," she said, her voice tight. "I heard what he said about us, about me." I nodded. I didn't interrupt. "I didn't know he was trying to protect anything," she whispered. "I thought he just didn't want to be a dad anymore." Her voice cracked on the last word. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "He made a choice," I said gently, "one that cost both of us." She shook her head. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you share any of this when you found it?" I didn't flinch, because I needed to stop being someone who waited for permission to feel things. I needed to know who I was before I could explain him to you. Her eyes searched mine. "And who are you now?" It was the first time she had ever asked me that. I thought for a moment, not to come up with the right words, but to make sure I meant them. "I'm someone who knows what it costs to be silent, and what it feels like to stop being afraid of my own life." She let out a breath, shaky and long. Her posture softened. "I'm sorry I pulled away after he disappeared," she said. "I blamed you for a long time. I know that wasn't fair." "It was human," I said. "We all needed someone to blame, and I didn't offer you anything else to hold on to." She reached for her coffee then, took a small sip. "I kept thinking if I could just figure out why he left, I'd finally understand myself," she said. "But after hearing him speak on that tape, I realized something." I waited. "I don't need to understand him anymore," she said. "I need to understand you." That's when the tears came. Not hers, mine. Because I hadn't expected this moment. I hadn't planned for it. I wasn't trying to repair something anymore. I had made peace with the silence between us. I had accepted that motherhood, real motherhood, doesn't always come with thank yous or redemption. But here she was, sitting across from me, not as a child needing comfort, but as a woman choosing to return. And I realized this wasn't about forgiveness or resolution. This was recognition. She saw me now, not as the woman who let it all fall apart, but as the woman who carried it anyway. We talked for hours that day about the house, the wall, the documents, her childhood, my loneliness, what we both lost, what we still had. She asked if I was going to claim everything Ward left. I told her yes, but not for me, for us. "I don't need his legacy to live comfortably," I said. "I need it to write a different story. For you. For whoever comes after you." She smiled. "You're kind of a badass, you know that?" I laughed. "I'm just tired of being scared." She stayed the night, slept in her old bedroom. In the morning, we had coffee again, this time with toast and scrambled eggs and the soft sound of birds outside the window. As she packed up to leave, she turned to me at the door. "I'm proud of you," she said. I nodded, voice catching. "I'm proud of you, too." Then she said something I never expected. "If you ever want to sell the house, I'd help you pack or stay, whatever you want." I looked around the room. For the first time, I didn't feel bound to these walls. I felt free inside them. "I don't know yet," I said, "but whatever I do next, I'll choose it." She smiled. "That's all I needed to hear." And with that, she left. Not in distance, just in time. Because now I knew I wasn't alone in this story anymore. But more importantly, I didn't need not to be. I had already returned to myself. The wall is gone now. 2 weeks ago, I had it professionally removed. Not patched, not covered, removed. The contractor asked why. I said I didn't like secrets in my house anymore. Behind where the panel once stood, I placed a single floating shelf. On it sits the old cassette recorder, now silent. Next to it, the crayon Mother's Day card Faye gave me when she was 12. And beside that, the framed photo of her and me at the beach, squinting into the sun, wind-tangled hair, both of us laughing, the kind of laugh that comes from nothing and everything at once. I didn't do it to create a shrine. I did it to remind myself, what's buried in walls doesn't have to stay there. There's something deeply sacred about rebuilding in the exact space where you were once erased. Not demolishing, not painting over, but building. I wake earlier now. I open the windows even when it's cold. I speak more, even when there's no one to answer. I planted new flowers in the front yard this spring. Marigolds, tulips, and bluebells. I trimmed back the roses Ward once tended. They look better than they ever did. And most importantly, I feel clean inside. Not untouched, not invincible. Just clear. Sometimes I still wonder who left the package. It could have been someone from the agency, someone Ward trusted, someone who waited for the right time. Or maybe it was just fate, a delayed message finally reaching its destination. But I no longer feel the need to chase that answer. What matters is what I did with it when it arrived, because it didn't just bring me truth. It brought me back to myself. Faye visits more often now. We talk less about Ward and more about the future. She told me she's thinking about starting a family. I smiled and said, "Only if you want to." Because I've learned how dangerous it can be to build something just because it's expected. She asked me what I wanted to do next, and I said, "Live." She laughed. "No plans?" I said, "Only one." She raised her eyebrows. "To never become invisible again." Because here's what I know now. Love is not silence. Loyalty is not disappearing. And survival is not the same thing as being alive. I don't need justice from anyone, because I've already delivered it to myself, one quiet act at a time. If this story moved you, even just a little, I hope you'll do one thing. Take back something that belongs to you. Your voice, your truth, your presence. And if you know someone who's been living small, share this with them. You never know what wall they might be waiting to open. Tell us in the comments, what would you do if a forgotten truth showed up on your doorstep? And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, because more stories like this are coming, and we believe every quiet woman has a powerful voice waiting to be heard. Thank you for watching. You matter. You're not invisible. Not here.